We are taught to fear debt, to treat it as a warning sign, a burden, a sign that something has already gone wrong, and yet modern life is built on it. Governments borrow to keep running. Banks lend to create more money. Markets rise on credit. Homes, universities, businesses, even retirement systems are tied to promises that have not been paid for yet. Debt is no longer sitting at the edge of the system. It is the system. That is the contradiction at the center of modern life. The thing we are told to avoid has become the thing the world cannot function without, and that should make us uneasy. Because if debt has become normal, then something deeper has changed. Not just in finance, but in how society organizes trust, power, growth, and survival. So the real question is not why debt is dangerous. It is when debt stopped being an exception and became the default condition of civilization. For most of human history, debt was not seen as normal. It was a mark of weakness, dependence, a sign that someone had already lost control. To owe was to stand lower than the person who was owed. In many societies, debt could cost you land, freedom, status, even your place inside the moral order of the community. It carried shame because it meant your future no longer fully belonged to you. But the modern world speaks a very different language. Now debt can signal credibility. Governments issue it to prove capacity. Corporations use it to expand. Banks create it to grow the money supply. Markets reward it when it looks productive, stable, and manageable. Something fundamental has flipped. What earlier civilizations feared as a path into dependency, modern systems now treat as a tool of power. And that is the real paradox. Debt did not merely survive into modern life. It changed status. It moved from the margins of failure to the center of legitimacy. The old moral warning did not disappear. It was absorbed and reorganized into the operating logic of civilization. To see how strange the modern world really is, we have to go back to the beginning. In the ancient world, debt was never just financial. It could take your field, your harvest, your children's future. In some societies, if a farmer could not repay what he owed, he could lose his land, fall into bondage, or be pushed outside the social order that once protected him. Debt was dangerous because it did not stay private for long. When too many families lost what kept them alive, the problem stopped being personal. It became political. Villages weakened. Labor disappeared. Anger hardened. The social fabric began to split. Early civilizations understood this with brutal clarity. If debt was allowed to accumulate without limit, it could hollow out society from within. Not with one dramatic collapse, but slowly, through dispossession, dependency, and fear. That is why some ancient rulers periodically canceled debts, not out of kindness, but survival. They knew a society crushed by debt could not remain stable, loyal, or governable. Long before modern economics, civilizations had already learned a hard truth. Debt was never only about money. It was about who gets to remain free. There was a time when people believed a society could not be saved by preserving debt, but by canceling it. That sounds almost alien now. In the modern world, debt is treated as something to manage, refinance, extend, and stabilize. But in parts of the ancient world, rulers sometimes reached the opposite conclusion. If obligations piled up for too long, too many families would lose land, labor, and freedom. And once that happened, the damage spread far beyond the household. A debt crisis did not stay inside the ledger. It emptied fields, weakened armies, broke loyalty, turned private desperation into public disorder. So some rulers wiped the slate clean, not because they opposed hierarchy, not because they were generous, but because they understood something cold and practical. A population crushed by debt could no longer sustain the state. That is the first great reversal in this story. There was once a world in which debt cancellation was seen as necessary for survival. So what changed? How did civilization move from the logic of clearing debt to preserve society, to the logic of preserving debt in order to run society? The decisive break came in late 17th century England. This is where debt changed character. For most of history, debt had been something that pulled individuals downward. But now the state discovered something far more powerful. It could borrow against taxes that had not yet been collected. That changed everything. A government no longer needed to wait for treasure, conquest, or a full treasury before acting. It could pull resources from the future into the present and use them now. War made this urgent. Rivalry with France demanded ships, weapons, and money on a scale older systems could not reliably provide. So England built something new, a credible public debt, backed not by gold in a room, but by confidence that the state could keep taxing, keep paying, and keep surviving. This was the real invention. Debt was no longer just a private burden. It became a public technology of power. From that point on, borrowing could finance armies, expand institutions, and strengthen the machinery of government itself. Modern debt did not emerge by accident. It was designed as a way to turn future trust into present force. The real shift was not just that governments borrowed. It was that their promises could now be bought, sold, valued, and used. That is when debt became something new. Once a state's promise to pay interest could circulate beyond the original lender, it stopped being just a claim on money. It became an asset, something that could generate income, be traded to someone else, pledged as security, or priced in the market like a form of stored confidence. That changed the psychology of debt. The lender was no longer simply waiting to be repaid. They were now holding an instrument that could work for them in the meantime. And once that happened, debt began to reverse its meaning. What had once looked like danger started to look like opportunity. Not for everyone, and not equally, but enough to change the direction of the system. This is the hidden foundation of modern finance. Debt did not become normal because fear disappeared. It became normal because power learned how to package a promise and make that promise desirable. Once states learned how to borrow credibly, debt stopped being merely a financial tool. It became imperial power, stretched across time. Before this shift, expansion depended on what a ruler could physically seize: gold, silver, tribute, land, labor. Power moved at the speed of conquest. If the treasury ran dry, ambition had to slow down. Debt changed that rhythm. Now a state could borrow first, build first, mobilize first, and pay later through taxes not yet collected. Ships could be launched before revenues arrived. Wars could be fought before spoils were won. Ports, roads, arsenals, and bureaucracies could be expanded in advance of the wealth meant to sustain them. That made empire more than larger. It made it faster, more continuous, and more organized. Debt did not just fund war, it reorganized the state's relationship to time itself. It allowed governments to drag future resources into the present and turn expectation into force. This is why debt belongs at the center of imperial history. It did not merely follow expansion. It multiplied the scale of what expansion could become. So here the question becomes even larger. What if modern empires did not rise mainly from wealth already in hand, but from the ability to borrow against wealth that did not yet exist? That possibility changes the whole picture. It means power was no longer limited by the gold already stored in a vault, or the tribute already extracted from conquered land. A strong state could now act before it possessed the resources in full. It could convert future taxes, future trade, future obedience into present capacity. And that is a very different kind of power. It is not just military strength, it is temporal strength. The power to move first, to organize sooner, to build institutions ahead of available wealth, and then force society to catch up with the promises already made. This is why debt belongs inside the story of empire, not on the sidelines of it. It helps explain how states became larger, faster, and more durable than older kingdoms could ever be. Modern empire did not simply accumulate wealth. It learned how to spend the future before the future arrived. Then the 20th century changed the scale of everything. World wars demanded mobilization beyond anything earlier states had known. Then came depression, unemployment, bank failures, and social breakdown on a mass scale. Governments did not shrink in response, they expanded. And with that expansion, debt changed again. It was no longer just a tool for war or for imperial reach. It became a permanent instrument of management. States borrowed to fight, then to rebuild, then to stabilize demand, support employment, fund welfare systems, rescue banks, and prevent collapse from spreading through the entire social order. This is where the bridge to the modern world becomes clear. Central banks moved closer to the center of power. Public debt markets deepened. Financial crises were no longer treated as isolated accidents, but as threats to the whole system. So debt became routine. Not because the danger disappeared, but because modern societies decided they could no longer survive without mechanisms large enough to absorb shock. What had once been an emergency measure became part of the operating structure of everyday life. And once that happened, debt stopped waiting for crisis. It became the way modern states learned to live with crisis permanently. Then another boundary weakened. As the world moved further away from gold, money became less constrained by metal and more dependent on credibility. That shift opened far more space for debt. Under a gold-bound system, governments were tied, at least in theory, to something tangible. Their room to expand was narrower. Their promises faced a harder limit. But once money rested more fully on state authority, central banking, and bond markets, the architecture changed. Now governments were not locked as tightly to what sat in a vault. They could operate through confidence, through taxation, through refinancing, through the market's willingness to keep accepting state promises as safe assets. Debt no longer sat behind the system as an emergency reserve. It moved into the center of monetary life that made the modern order more flexible and more dangerous. A system less constrained by gold could absorb larger shocks, fund larger states, and sustain larger promises. But it also became more dependent on belief, on the idea that these promises would continue to hold value, even when the metal behind them was gone. So this was not simply liberation. It was an exchange. The world gained room to move and lost the comfort of a harder boundary. The reason debt feels normal now is simple and unsettling. It is almost always someone else's asset. A government bond is a liability for the state, but for a pension fund, it is security. For a bank, it is collateral. For an insurer, it is a reserve. For a central bank, it is part of the machinery that keeps money and credit moving. The same pattern repeats everywhere. One side owes, another side depends. A loan that burdens one balance sheet becomes income on another. A mortgage is a household obligation, but also a stream of payments for lenders, investors, and institutions built around those payments. What looks like pressure from below often appears as stability from above. That is why debt no longer sits outside the system like a warning sign. It circulates inside the system as structure. It supports portfolios. It anchors markets. It helps price risk. It backs promises. It gives financial institutions something to hold, trade, lend against, and trust until that trust begins to crack. So debt became normal, not because the danger vanished, but because modern society learned how to build entire layers of order on top of what someone else still owes. There is another reason debt became so difficult to separate from normal life. In the modern banking system, lending does not just move existing money around. It helps create new money. When banks issue loans, they are not simply handing out idle cash from a vault. They are expanding credit into the economy, and that credit becomes purchasing power in the present. Homes are bought with it. Businesses expand with it. Payrolls, inventories, construction, and consumption all begin to lean on it. That is why money and debt became so tightly fused. The more credit expands, the larger the economy can appear. Asset prices rise, spending continues, growth feels alive, but the stability comes with conditions. Those loans must be serviced, interest must be paid, confidence must hold. Banks must believe borrowers remain viable, and society must believe the flow can continue without breaking. So modern prosperity is not just built on money. It is built on money created through promises, and that gives the system a quiet tension beneath its surface. Because when credit expands, the world feels bigger. But when trust contracts, everything built on borrowed momentum begins to feel smaller at once. Here is the darker realization. Modern society does not merely tolerate debt. It needs debt in order to keep looking stable. That is what makes this system so strange. The thing once treated as a danger now functions like a support beam. If credit contracts too quickly, asset prices fall. Lending slows, investment weakens, growth fades. Employers pull back. Unemployment rises. What looked solid begins to look conditional. So the system cannot easily let debt disappear. It needs borrowing to continue just enough to keep the machinery from seizing. Not always dramatically. Often quietly, through refinancing, rollover, stimulus, mortgage credit, business lending, and state borrowing that prevents contraction from turning into panic. This is the unnerving reversal at the center of modern life. Debt is feared in theory, but required in practice, and that means what we call stability may not be the absence of danger at all. It may simply be a condition in which the flow of debt is still strong enough to hide the danger beneath it. That is why this normality feels secure, right up until it does tea. By this point, debt was no longer confined to states, banks, or markets. It had moved into ordinary life. Homes were bought through debt. Education was financed through debt. Consumption leaned on debt. Businesses survived on credit lines. Cities and local governments borrowed to build roads, utilities, schools, and transport. Even the future people imagined for themselves increasingly arrived through money they did not yet have. That changed more than finance. It changed the rhythm of life. A home was no longer just something to save for. It became something to enter through decades of obligation. Education became not only a path upward, but a claim on future income. Growth for firms often meant leverage. Stability for households often meant monthly payments that could not be interrupted for long. So debt stopped looking exceptional. It became the background structure of expectation. Not just how economies expand, but how people marry, move, study, work, consume, and plan. Modern society did not simply allow debt into daily life. It reorganized daily life around it. And once that happens, debt no longer feels like a crisis. It feels like adulthood. But debt does not press on society evenly. That is one of the most important things the modern story hides. For those who hold financial assets, debt can look like income. A bond pays interest. A loan produces returns. A mortgage becomes cash flow for someone else. From above, debt often appears orderly, productive, even reassuring. From below, it feels different. For people living mainly on wages, fixed salaries, or unstable work, debt is rarely an asset. It is a monthly claim on the future, a pressure that narrows choices, a cost of staying in place. Interest becomes not just a price, but a quiet mechanism of transfer. Money moves upward, not always dramatically, often invisibly. through payments so ordinary they begin to feel natural. This is why rising debt and rising inequality so often live in the same house. The same system that offers security to one layer of society can create dependence for another. What appears as yield on one balance sheet can feel like exhaustion on another life. So debt is not only a financial tool, it is also a social filter. It decides who earns from time and who spends their life catching up to it. As long as confidence holds, debt can look almost benign. It looks like order, routine, management. But when confidence breaks, debt changes shape very quickly. It stops resembling stability and starts resembling discipline. Hard discipline. The kind imposed through shrinking credit, rising yields, emergency cuts, and public pain. We have seen this before. In Greece, sovereign debt turned into austerity and social fracture. In Argentina, debt crises kept returning until instability itself became part of daily life. In Sri Lanka, the shortage was no longer theoretical. It was fuel, food, electricity, and political breakdown. This is the darker truth. There is a huge difference between debt when the system trusts you and debt when it no longer does. In the first case, it circulates quietly. In the second, it begins to command. And when that moment comes, the first people to pay are usually not the architects of the system. They are workers, families, pensioners, small businesses, and ordinary citizens whose lives were built on assumptions they did not create. That is when debt drops its polite mask and shows itself as power. The deeper twist is this. The question is not simply who has more debt and who has less. It is who is allowed to live with debt and who gets punished the moment debt stops looking trustworthy. That is where power enters the picture in its clearest form. Large states, especially those at the center of the global financial order, can often roll debt for longer. Markets give them more time. Their bonds remain acceptable longer. Their currencies carry more institutional trust. Their weakness can be postponed. Weaker states rarely receive that luxury. They are judged faster, pressured sooner, forced into higher borrowing costs, harsher adjustments, and more visible pain. The same debt that looks manageable at the center can look intolerable at the edge. So this is not just a story about quantity. It is a story about hierarchy. Debt reveals which countries are cushioned by trust and which are exposed to discipline. That is why sovereign debt is never only economics. It is a map of power. And in that map, some nations are permitted to refinance uncertainty. Others are forced to suffer it in public. Now we arrive at the present. Debt is no longer a tool reserved for emergency. It has become the default condition of the global economy. Governments rely on it to finance deficits. Markets rely on it as safe collateral. Banks rely on it to extend credit. Households rely on it to reach the standard of living modern society taught them to expect. Debt is no longer waiting at the edge of the system, ready for crisis. It is inside the system every day. That is what makes the modern moment so total. The state needs debt to keep functioning. Finance needs debt to keep pricing, lending, and trading. Citizens need debt to buy homes, study, expand businesses, and keep pace with the cost of ordinary life. Even stability itself now depends on promises that have not yet been fulfilled, so there is no clean outside, no safe distance from the structure. Debt is not just something governments have. It is something the entire social order now breathes through. And once a society reaches that point, the real danger is not simply that debt exists. It is that almost everything has learned to depend on it at once. This is the point where the meaning of normal has to be redefined. Debt did not become normal because people forgot it was risky. It became normal because the modern order was built so that it cannot function smoothly without it. That is a very different claim. It means normal. Here does not mean harmless. It does not mean natural. It does not mean accidental, it means structured, designed, embedded into the way states govern, banks lend, markets price assets, and households try to live inside the promises of modern life. That is why debt keeps returning even after every warning. The system is not merely tolerating it. The system is organized around it. Remove debt too quickly, and growth weakens. Credit tightens. Asset prices fall. Institutions strain. Daily life begins to lose its rhythm. What looked like stability turns out to have been conditional all along. So the real revelation is not that debt is everywhere. It is that modern society has arranged itself to depend on it so deeply that dependence now feels ordinary. That is what normalization really means. Not that the danger disappeared, but that the danger was woven into the structure and taught to behave like everyday life. Modern civilization did not defeat the burden of debt. It learned how to live inside it, how to distribute it across classes, institutions, and generations, how to price the future through it, how to build growth on it, how to call that arrangement stability. So long as confidence keeps moving, that may be the real story of the modern age. Not that debt became safe, but that society became skilled at absorbing its pressure, hiding its tension, and turning dependence into routine. Debt did not disappear, it became architecture. And once that happens, the final question is no longer whether debt will vanish. It will not. The real question is what happens when the trust holding this ordinary-looking world together begins to thin. Because when confidence fades, what once looked stable can reveal itself as suspension. What once felt normal can begin to feel improvised. And what was called order may turn out to have been a long extension of promises that could only survive as long as people believed in them. That is the uneasy truth beneath modern money. We did not escape debt. We built a civilization that learned to breathe through it.